Good morning, everyone. All right, I'm going to review today's options trades real quick. It was yet another lame Friday. I finished small red today. If I were trading futures, I would have been green. Um, but before I get started, I sent out a TA alert at the very end of the day saying if most of this move invalidates, and it was roughly like when it was like this, it was like right here. If most of this drop invalidates, it's a great trade to take to this high. It did happen here. Um, you could have been triggered in here. It was technically most of it invalidated. A little bit higher would have been nice, because uh, because there's just so much resistance here. But that's still in play. So it looks like it may be going to pre-market low. NQ misses pre-market low, so I'm actually leaning bearish for it to happen. But as far as this morning's TA goes, this morning opened up like this. Here's what this morning looked like. Couple things. We were chopping up from demand. Chopping up is typically kind of bearish. However, we had some very nice pivots above, and I'll hide this perfect pivot indicator. We had very nice pivots above, especially on NQ. I mean, we've been making lower lows in demand, which you're going to see here. We have invalidated a majority of the entire drop. 8 mornings out of 10, or possibly even 9 mornings out of 10, you're going to sweep this high. So that was my sentiment going into today is I am bullish for the pre-market high to break. Right? And again, 8 to 9 mornings out of 10 that look like this, and they happen fairly often. At least once a month. At least once a month, this kind of setup happens. A vast majority of the time, you're going to get that pre-market high. So that's my sentiment going into this. And I just need to wait to be triggered in. So first candle on market open goes, and it is a bearish candle. So I'm like, okay, if that entire candle invalidates, I will hop into calls and I'll take it to the pre-market high. Next candle happened and it didn't invalidate the entire candle. Like, okay, it did put in a selling wick. If the next candle on the NASDAQ opens green and invalidates that whole selling wick that just formed on this green candle, it'll be pretty decent for QQQ calls. It did open green very briefly, but then it flipped to red. So I'm still waiting. Now, keep in mind, you could argue a put entry here because you did get higher highs sweep, and I believe there's a supply here. Or maybe not. Maybe not. You did get a supply rejection on NQ. You did sweep higher highs. You didn't validate most of the move. But here's the problem. We're in very heavy demand, and my overall bias is still up. So in order for me to enter puts, it has to be on whatever's weaker, and I need it to drop to roughly down here, and I take it to the pre-market low, right? Which means I need to enter roughly here. I need to enter below this pivot because I'm thinking it's likely to sweep this pivot and then bounce and I'm going to end up having to get into calls. So I need to fully invalidate that possibility in order for me to get in. So a couple options now. I'm still waiting to enter calls. If this drop invalidates, I will be in. And I thought I was going to maybe get in there. I didn't. And we got this big red candle. Here we did sweep this pivot, and I'll just mark it out. So we swept the pivot on both, but we put in a buying wick. So not thinking about puts yet because that is a potential reversal signal. And we do end up kind of bouncing just a little bit. I'll just kind of fast forward here. And then we end up dropping again. Now, I can start kind of thinking about puts, but here's the problem. We're chopping down in demand, which is typically a bullish thing, right? And you can kind of start to see a falling wedge form on ES. So I'm being as patient as possible this morning. Keep in mind, 20 minutes went by, not a single trade was taken. I almost got in a single time, right? And I had lots of sentiment this morning. Great pivot down here, great pivots above. There's places to trade to. There's price targets to trade to. But this morning was all about exercising patience for me. I need this falling wedge to break. So this candle happened, and you could argue an entry on this candle, but I can't. Not only do we get a huge volume spike on this candle, which could potentially indicate reversal, NQ actually made lower lows on this candle, and so did ES. We have not invalidated the possible falling wedge, and we're still in really heavy demand. So I need one more decent red candle to get in, and I'll be able to get in reasonably using liquidity analysis and momentum analysis for the pre-market low. And this candle does happen. Now, I feel a little early into this candle. I tried filling at 2.75 right here. It didn't fill. I filled at 2.9 roughly here. And really my PT was pre-market low, but I wanted to trim at NQ pre-market low. Okay, and it looked like NQ was going to get there first, but on this drop, it looked like ES ended up flipping weaker. Looking back on it, I see why I did. If we think about it, this green candle right here, 2 candles ago, was smaller on ES. The red candle was much larger, and this candle was pretty much the same. So if I were to go back in time, maybe Q would have been a little bit better, but it wouldn't have changed the result of this trade. So we get to the PT. I enter at 2.9. Immediately, the contracts were like 3.5. They were green, but I can't trim here. Now, if I had a way better entry, which I can't because the falling wedge is still valid and the trade is not high probability enough. And let me share my screen because I just realized my screen's not sharing. And keep in mind, I was in voice this morning too, so most of you guys know what I'm talking about. Well, the problem was I can't trim here because NQ's not even at its PT yet. So, I can't do anything. I plan on trimming half when NQ got to pre-market low, and then when ES got to pre-market low. I did forget a key aspect of this trade. I did enter this trade half size. I entered this trade half size because, well, we are making lower lows in demand. I kind of expected this trade to bounce. And when it bounces, I average down and then take it to pre-market low. The odds of it bouncing are just simply too high. With how much demand is here and with how far it is to PT, which is all the way down here, the odds of bouncing are too high. So I entered half size. And if we blew through this pivot and got to here, I'd average up on the trade. So we end up bouncing, and I averaged down at the top of this candle. And now I'm in one normal size position. Hard stop loss still. And I did get back to break even here. Unfortunately, ES slipped stronger than NQ, which is really unfortunate. But we did have news coming up. And unfortunately, the news was bullish. And I did close out this trade for a minus 30% loss. My average on this trade was 2.65. I closed at 1.85. Not at the very end of this candle, a little bit before the end. I closed at 1.85 for minus 30%. Looking back on it, it was a great trade. Going half size on the trade initially was a flawless execution. It was a great idea, gave the trade the best chance of winning. But with this news candle, looks like it was bullish, looks like it was a full-on short squeeze. Yeah, it's just invalidated. The bear sentiment's invalidated, which is fine. So good stop loss here. And I'll just keep this right here so you guys can see. And now my call sentiment is back, right? So in order for me to get into calls, I want it to clear this pivot. Now, you could argue an entry earlier, much earlier here, but that was just too early for me, and I'm not one on reversing trades, right? It's bad for the psychology. It just opens the doors to a lot of psychological risk that I don't want to take. So just like the first hypothesis, I need most of this drop to invalidate, and not most of it, like a vast majority of it. So this happens. We did invalidate a majority of it. I was planning on just entering full size all the way up here. But we have a potential inverse head and shoulders now, which you guys can see. And here you could see way more than 50% of this drop has been invalidated. So here's the potential inverse head and shoulders. It looks like it's putting in the right shoulder, or it wants to. There is also potentially another one here. So I'm actually thinking, okay, if this pullback invalidates, I'm going to enter half size and then either average down or average up. And I did end up filling on this candle. This is a great candle. I mean, this was a clean bull flag. Very, very clean entry. 90% chance the next candle after this is going to be green. But I don't know if it's going to pull back before supply. The point at which I'd like to average up is roughly 59.10 to take it to this high. And then average down is roughly here, right? With a hard stop loss would be moved to like roughly here. So that's kind of what the trade's looking like at the moment. It did end up going great. I did average up. This candle a little bit. This candle a little bit at the end, and then the next candle was red. And then I added the last bit kind of at the start of this green candle. I needed the selling wick of this candle to invalidate. Now, this candle did end up becoming a huge candle. So I did average up there. So my percent gains were less, but I didn't really sell anything until I didn't really sell much until NQ got new high of day. So similar thing here. This is my big PT up here, but I plan on trimming heavily when NQ gets new high of day, depending on the candles, of course. So I entered those calls at 2.35 and they got the 3.6, a high of 3.6 on this candle. So they got like 60% gains. I didn't really trim much though. I sold like one contract maybe, but I didn't trim like anything. I was looking for NQ new high of day. So we chop a good bit. NQ does end up getting new high of day after a lot of chop, but here's the problem. When NQ gets new high of day, those contracts are only at 3.3, right? They were at 3.6. These contracts are chopping a massive, massive amount. So I start aggressively trimming up here. Not only are the contracts chopping a massive amount, signaling net outflow from the calls, which is bearish, we are chopping up in heavy supply, especially on the NASDAQ, and we have just put in a potential bearish liquidity sweep on a solid major pivot, which is high of day. So I trim really heavy here, and unfortunately I only get like 30 to 40% gains, but I still leave roughly a quarter to a third of my position in for this PT. Unfortunately, it didn't end up getting any better. I ended up selling the rest pretty much on this pullback because it was just chopping too much. On each of these pullbacks, these contracts are dropping pretty much to my break even because I personally averaged out. They're dropping to roughly 2.6, 2.7. And that's unfortunate. So I end up selling my last runner on this pullback right here, and I was out. Nope, not this one. This one, when this green candle invalidated, this was supposed to be it. It really should have broke pre-market high here. But here, when that invalidated, I called it. The contracts were just simply chopping too much. Keep in mind, the calls got to 3.6 here, and at the top of this candle, they got to, I'll tell you right now, 637. They got to a high of 3.2, and they came from a low of 2.3. Okay. I entered at 2.3 here. The contracts hit 2.3 here. Terrible. Like, terrible chop. It was a very easy decision to sell on every single bounce. Now, if you're a futures trader, you don't really got to worry about that. Unfortunately, I'm trading options this morning. So it was not a fun time. So that's why I was trimming so heavily before PT. And then I sold the rest on this red candle. And this red candle dipped back down to 740. It dipped all the way back down to 2.65 is what it closed at, which was pretty much my average. I think slightly above my average, if I remember correctly. And then I was out. I just couldn't take it anymore. You know, if just a few red candles happen, I'm going to be red on this trade. The unfortunate part about that is, well, yes, they, for an average sell of 3.2 and 3.3, at 3.3 was a 40% gain, but because a large portion of my trade, roughly a third, after my average up was sold at roughly break even, and the rest averaged 30 to 40%. Well, the last trade was a 30% loss on full size. I actually ended up finishing small red today, like a fraction of a green trade, like a third or half of one of my average green trades, which sucks. It really sucks. But you know what? It did pretty much the best that I could possibly do today. You know, I waited as long as possible for as much confirmation as possible to go short. And while, yes, it did sweep a predominant pivot here, which was not impossible at all, this trade itself, I would take tomorrow, right? It's a trade I'd take tomorrow, just like I probably take shorts now. Yeah, if this bounce were to fully invalidate, so it doesn't look like an inverse head and shoulders, I would be in the same trade right here to this low. We'll see if that actually works out. But the call trade was flawless. TA was flawless. Stopping out was flawless. So just a solid day, psych-wise. Unfortunately, Fridays lately, there just hasn't been money to be made. Today, small red. Could have been green if, you know, I traded futures and didn't have the contracts chop a ton. Last Friday was break even with one trade, and I don't remember the Friday before that, but I think it was like small green is what I believe it was. So Fridays have not been a great day to trade lately. But, you know, it's rare that I have a green day when pivots aren't swept. And we did sweep a little bit of pivots, which caused this green trade. And even this red trade was a solid green to red trade. So that was a good day. Good day. Unfortunate that contracts chop so much, but it is what it is. We manage risk flawlessly. I mean, if I didn't stop out here, try to save the trade, that would have been devastating. If I don't stop out here, that would be devastating. Those calls are currently 90 cents. So, yeah, good job. It was a solid morning this morning as far as TA and execution goes. Zin says, second red day of the month, the entire month green. Congratulations, Zin. That is fantastic. You've been crushing it lately. Love seeing you guys absolutely kill it. But all right, that's pretty much today's analysis. It was boring, like a lot of patience. I waited 20 minutes ish to get into my first trade. Yeah, exactly 20 minutes. And then the next trade, I sat in it for from 7:04 all the way to pretty much, yeah, I sat in that trade for 40 minutes. And on 0 day contracts, that's going to hurt, as far as theta and implied volatility is concerned. So, but no one has any questions whatsoever. Everyone's good. All right, sweet. Well, if I don't talk to you guys at all, until Monday, have a blessed weekend. Let me know if you guys need anything. We are doing the small giveaway today. You guys will just have to remind me about that. And yeah, hopefully we can get a Friday that's actually worth trading. The last few Fridays have been lame, but overall this week was a fantastic week. Yesterday, super bright green day. The day before that, Wednesday, fairly green. One loss and one really big win. And then Monday was very bright green as well, with one small loss and then a handful of bright green wins. So it was a very good week. Hopefully next week is just as good or even better. And yeah, let me know if you guys need anything. Otherwise, I will ping you guys when this recording is posted. And yeah, have a great rest of your guys' days. Good luck if you continue to trade.